Good morning. I am going to begin by singing to you because when I think of Psalm 28, the main thing that I drawed from it or drew from it before I prepared was the closing line, which has a very popular melody. And at the end, there'll be a little video of people singing and dancing. But here's how the last line of Psalm 9 sounds. Hoshia et amecha, uvarech et nachlatecha, urem, 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 urem benasem adolam. Hoshia et amecha, uvarech et nachlatecha, urem, 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 urem benasem ad haolam. Now that melody was written by a friend of mine. And I say friend, and I pause because this particular individual, which I wrote about in introducing the psalm for today, is larger than life for me. Rabbi Dr. Abe Twersky is a psychiatrist who dedicated his medical career to working with addictions. But he also was engaged in teaching and writing about Judaism, as on both sides of his family, Hasidic aristocracy, going back to the founders 200 plus years ago of Hasidism. And his family has a tradition of song as very important to their spirituality. And so Abe, in his home, has a piano and he tinkers, he writes melodies. And that melody he wrote and sang it to the last line of Psalm 28, which is sung particularly on Sukkot, when at the end of the circling the synagogue with what are called Hoshanot, the conclusion is, deliver your people, bless your inheritance, and shepherd them and uplift them forever. It's also those words, Hoshia et amecha, as part of our daily prayer, but the song was in the context of Sukkot, and he taught it to his son who was in a youth group. It caught on, and as these things take flight, music has wings. It spread over the Jewish world. And we'll come back to that at the end. Though I will say, so I don't lose this important awareness, when people sing, as I've seen thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of people dancing and singing to that melody, almost none of them know its source. They may know that this particular line is from Psalm 28, but the melody is the melody. And the anonymity of the melody, for me, is part of its spirituality. You see, like Psalms themselves endure across generations, are personalized, and yet we don't know who the authors are. We don't even know what is the moment or the historic event that prompted Psalm 28. And on some level, it doesn't matter because the words have wings too. And at their best, as that melody becomes second nature to us and uplifts us, so the words of a psalm can do the same. They can become second nature, ours, and serve to uplift. Psalm 28, I tinkered with more than any probably, and that's saying a lot because I tinker a lot. I must have sent Eric 4 different versions this morning. And that's because words matter, even commas matter, as we've seen, all the more in poetry. And particularly, I prepared this psalm several days ago, but the morning of, I kind of immersed myself in it and became aware of some nuances that each time give me a sense of aha and delight. And with that, let me first read the psalm to you, and then I'll tell you about its construction, some of its wordplay, and leave us with a question that emerges from this particular psalm. So let me first read so that you can take in the 9 lines. And I smile because among the last things that I did was add quotation marks to verses 8 and 9, in that this psalm leads to, and with my song, I will give thanks to God. That's verse 7, which then points to verses 8 and 9 being a song within a song. And now, Psalm 28, which I entitle, My Artisan Has Heard My Voice. For David, to you, Adonai, I will call. My artisan, do not be deaf to me. For if you be dumb to me, I would become like those controlled that go down into the earthly pit. Hear the voice of my pleas for grace when I cry to you for deliverance, when I lift my hands toward your holy shrine. Do not drag me down with the wicked, those workers of iniquity who speak peace with their neighbors and evil is in their divided hearts. Pay them according to their works, according to the evil of their passion-driven acts. As the completed deeds of their hands, pay them. Return to them their justice, for they do not discern the works of Adonai. Rather, God's handy deeds, they would break them down and not build them up. Blessed is Adonai, for God has heard the voice of my pleas for grace. Adonai is my strength and my protector. In God, my heart has trusted, and I was helped, and my heart rejoiced. And with my song, I will give thanks to God. Adonai is a strength unto them, and God is a stronghold of deliverance to God's anointed. Deliver your people and bless your inheritance, and shepherd them and uplift them forever. So a little bit about the construction of the psalm. It's divided into 3 parts, and the first part is can be divided into 2. The first part is verses 1 to 5, and it's a plea for grace before evildoers. And of those 5 verses, the middle one, 3, has 3 different descriptions of these threats. We don't know of a specific threat by these people to the Psalter, but we know that their wickedness, their hypocrisy is endangering. So verse 3, there are 3 different expressions. Do not drag me down with the wicked, 1. Those workers of iniquity, 2. 3, who speak peace with their neighbors and evil is in their divided hearts. So at the center of this first module is the sense of the danger of those who are wicked. And there's a lot of wordplay in the Hebrew. So I use, for instance, in verse 3, the English expression divided heart, because in Hebrew, the word has 2 bets, bil vavam. So lev is normally with 1 vav. We do see elsewhere sometimes in the Bible 2 bets, which could be simply as an emphasis, but there's a lot of midrashim. Yesterday I talked about the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov, the inclination of good and the inclination of bad. And so the rabbis, when it's 2 bets, say that's referring to both of those inclination, or in this context, a divided heart. Earlier I had actually translated it as a divisive heart, meaning one who causes divisions to others. And that may be true as well. There's a second part, and that's verses 6 and 7. And that is a shift. After describing in the first 5 verses the wicked and a calling out for God's help in the very beginning, verses 1, I will call, do not be deaf to me, do not be dumb. Don't let me go down into the earthly pit like them. Hear the voice of my pleas for grace when I cry to you for deliverance, when I lift up my hands, a worshipful image toward your holy shrine. So there's this plea, and the plea, again, verses 1 to 5 combines 2 different components, speech and listening, voice, and lots of descriptions, particularly of the evil, with, again, many different words for the evil, of doing and working with hands. So the contrast between voice and hands. And now there's this sudden shift in verse 6. Praised is Adonai, or blessed is Adonai, for God has heard the voice of my pleas for grace. And we're not told what is it that has created this change. The classic commentators like Radak, who, a second. The classic commentators like Rabbi David Kimchi of France, of the early Middle Ages, he would identify this psalm as a psalm of David and would pick the moment as 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 16. There's a giant. It's now an old David. This giant, his name is Yishbi Benov, and he's threatening to kill David. It says in that moment that he is so big that he has a spear with 300 shekels of copper. I don't exactly know, but that sounds very heavy, plus a new sword. But in this case, unlike the Goliath tale, it's not King David who vanquishes his giant foe, but a soldier, Avishai ben Seruiah. And then the soldiers say to David, from now on, you don't go to battle. You stay and you pray for us. We will fight. You fight no more. And so that is verse 6 for that classic understanding by Radak. But we don't know that, of course, to be the case. And as I was saying at the beginning regarding anonymity, that is broader possibilities in terms of what happened for this Psalter, that the Psalter can now have this sense of God has heard the voice of my pleas. Adonai is my strength and my protector. In God my heart has trusted, and I was helped, and my heart rejoiced. And with my song I will give thanks to God. Which is to say, this psalm can be used at any time for gratitude. And that word gratitude is the last word of verse 7. Ahodenu, I will give great gratitude. And the context of gratitude here is my heart has trusted and I was helped. The trust came first, and then I was helped. And again, it can be any moment in anybody's life where there is the sense of uncertainty, of fear, of the works of the evildoers, however one defines evil doing, whether outside or that impulse, that compulsion from within. But with trust, there then is the sense that God, what is it one is trusting? Verse 7, that God is the source of strength and protection, and heart means mind in the biblical tradition. So by virtue of my trust in God as my strength and protector, God helped me. And that help enabled me to feel joy, to feel secure, to feel release that leads to song. When the Israelites crossed over to freedom in the Exodus story, the first thing that they did, Moses and Miriam, is they sang. To sing is to rejoice. And so I smile again to think that for me, Psalm 28 is the closing line of that famous song that only later I would know would be the song of Rabbi Twersky. So look at verses 8 and 9. It's like a song, but here there's a shift from the individual who had doubts that God is listening to then, if you will, choosing to trust in God as the source of strength and protection and finding help and rejoicing. The shift is to the people of Israel. Now, there's an interesting word, the third word of verse 8, Adonai Oz, God is strength, lamo could be to them, but if there was an ayin, that letter ayin, it would be la'amo, to his people, which actually kind of makes more sense because you get amecha as the third word in verse 9. But with even the classic commentator Ibn Ezra of Spain said that this could and should be read la'amo. But here's what happens in verses 8 and 9. The shift becomes of the Psalter rejoicing with a prayer. The song within the song is a messianic prayer. Literally, Adonai is a strength unto them, or unto his people, and God is a stronghold of deliverance, lemishicho, Mashiach, to his anointed one, to his Messiah. And then the last line, you have the opening word, see, is deliverer, Yeshua. Yeshua, like Yeshu, Yeshua is deliverance. That is the third to last word of verse 8, right? The strength, it's the deliverance of the Messiah. And then verse 9, deliver your people, which is to say, and bless your inheritance, uplift them, and shepherd them. I used a word play. Ra'im can either be to elevate. It can also be, well, but it can be like a pasture, and it can be to shepherd. And I like the word shepherd because it creates an image, which is described by others as well, of God picking up the people like a shepherd picks up a lamb to protect it, to carry it to high ground where it is safe from the beasts of prey. And it's a contrast, the lifting up to verse 1. Don't let me go down into the earthly pit, and now full circle. Rather, lift me up like a shepherd carrying me forever. And that again is part of the symmetry and the poetry of the psalm. I wanted to now show a picture of my teacher, Rabbi Twersky, and say another word about him before playing you, it's only 1 minute, how verse 9 sounds, and then some moments for conversation. So this is my friend Abe Twersky, seated. He's now in his mid to late 80s. And these are some friends with whom I visited him in his Jerusalem apartment, where he retired about 8 years ago with his wife, Gail. And my friends joined me in this afternoon visit. Because they're gracious, they put out a nice spread for us. And this is when I played for Rabbi Twersky, the video of hundreds of thousands of people singing Hoshea et Amecha and dancing to his melody. And in his own humble ways, a remarkably humble man, took great delight. And it was a great delight for me to show him that impact. So now I'm going to ask Eric if you can just play the melody for Hoshea et Amecha. Is that going to work? Do we have sound? This is actually in Maroon, I believe. All right. Eric, is that, I assume, is my video, right?
Correct.
Eric,
I was able to get it to work.
Oh, you're a good man. Thank you for coming through. So that's a peek into Maroon. That space is like a football field plus, only in that space, men dancing, but all different kinds of people, meaning the ultra-religious to non-religious, all dancing on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which is also identified as the day in which Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died. And in the Zohar, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the Zohar, the mystical commentary to the Torah, says to his followers that when I die, my soul will rise as a light to the source of light and love, and it will be a day of great celebration. And so that's the origin of Lag BaOmer being a time for fire, because his soul was going to elite from him, and singing and dancing in celebration. It's a whole separate teaching and conversation about the historicity of any of that. But what is true is the sense of Hoshea et Amecha, let's return to this last verse, has become one of those anthems of rejoicing that has a messianic overtone, as here. And when I now know this verse in its original context, I am even more delighted by its opening, which is, it's the Psalter saying, do not be deaf to me. For if you be dumb to me, I will become like those that go down into the earthly pit, with this quality of longing and even vulnerability that then segues by virtue of those middle verses 6 and 7 to finding that because I trusted in God, I was helped, and therefore let me sing. In our own lives, we have cause to pause to ask, when have we found ourselves surprised by a change in our attitude, our feeling heard? That's the key word. It appears, twice. Verses 2, Shma Kol, listen to my voice. And then in verse 6, Shma Kol, you heard my voice. So there's the echo of the longing and the response that leads to rejoicing, but it's not an individual rejoicing. It's a communal hoping. And we as a Jewish people are obsessed with a world that is redeemed, that is made safe from hypocrisy. That's the description of the wicked. A world in which there is integrity and peace. And that is the closing and the celebration. Deliver your people, bless your inheritance, and shepherd them, uplift them, back to the image of the shepherd uplifting your people, and if you will, because it's messianic, the world forever. With that, again, I delight in having this opportunity to be with you. Some thoughts or things about this psalm that might have resonated for you, or a question. Mimi, and then Rabbi Podwal.
In verse 1,
Yeah,
the word dumb,
yeah.
how does that relate, and what do you mean by that?
Good question. So techeshe is often translated as dumb. I did it partly because we use the expression deaf and dumb.
Right.
Dumb means do not speak. So if you don't speak to me, if you don't respond, and so it requires both listening and responding to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have that sense of your presence, of an immediacy, of a relationship of hearing and responding, then I'm going to be not unlike those who simply are like dead, who don't have the vitality of life, which comes with being engaged with the source of life.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? The word literally techeshe is also understood as be silent. So that's another way you'll see it translated. Other questions in terms of translations? If not, I'll point out some of the word plays here.
Well,
Rabbi Podwal.
I'll always look at this psalm differently, knowing that the wonderful Rabbi Twersky wrote the music for the last verse. And, you know, he's an example of a Hasidic, a true Hasidic rabbi who was yet totally involved in the secular world as well at the same time. I mean, like Maimonides. I mean,
Right.
Maimonides wasn't a Hasidic rabbi, but I mean, a rabbi dedicated to curing people from addiction. And in the previous generation, there was a Twersky from a part of this branch of the family, a Twersky in Boston, who also was a Hasidic rabbi to a small community. And at the same time, he was one of the world's leading scholars of Judaism and taught at Harvard.
Right. And his expertise was Maimonides, among other things. So a word about Rabbi Twersky, because he is, my publisher, Stuart Matlins, was a Wall Street PR guy. And he got involved, Stuart Matlins did, helping AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, through a friend. And he then became introduced to Rabbi Twersky because Rabbi Twersky dedicated his career to working with addicts, the people on the lowest social rung. And Stuart Matlin says to me once, if we Jews had saints, Abe Twersky would be my first proposed, member, because a little bit of this Abe Twersky story for a moment. He came from this long line of Hasidic rabbis on both sides of his family. And his father, who was the immigrant to America, had a brother who was the Hasidic rabbi in Chicago. So he moved to Milwaukee. And Abe grew up in Milwaukee, and he became a rabbi young. He's this brilliant guy. And he said, people aren't coming to me for counseling the way they go to my father. And in America, they go to psychiatrists if they have emotional issues. I should become a psychiatrist. So he was the first in his immediate family to go to college. And one moment, Danny Thomas, the famous actor, Christian Lebanese actor, paid for Abe Twersky to go to college, to medical school. And when he decided to go to a residency, he went to Pittsburgh, and he worked in a Catholic hospital. In Pittsburgh, there was no county hospital where, or I should say, there was no veterans hospital where people who had drinking problems, greater emotional needs would go. So they had this huge 150 beds in this Catholic hospital. And when he finished his residency, the sisters said to Abe, even though he was just finishing his residency, we would like you to be head of psychiatry here. And he said to them, you know, I'm honored by your request, but this is a full-time job, 7 days a week, and I'm a religious Jew, which means 25 hours of the week I would not be able to do the work. And they said, that's precisely why we're asking you to do it, because you're a religious man and we know you would do it with your whole heart. So he took it on. He would later create in Pittsburgh a major hospital just for addictions that would become a role model for the entire country. He would write books for Hazelton, the AA imprint. When he came to California, Betty Ford had him come to her house in Palm Springs with, frozen dinners. So he became well known as the Jewish teacher within that AA world. But here's the last piece. Hasidism teaches that you should see the imprint of God in every person. Abe is that rare man who actually was able to do that, who is able to dedicate his career by working with the lowest rung, mostly non-Jews, of course, in terms of his hospital, doing, back to your comment, Rabbi Podwal, not unlike Maimonides, doing the healing work as God's partner. And at the same time, saying of himself, my addiction is writing. And he wrote from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., 6 days a week. At this point, he has over 80 books, including a cookbook, books about his Hasidic ancestors, commentaries to many Jewish texts. And last, he is remarkably unassuming and kind. One more aside, and that he has this wonderful wife, Gail. After his first wife died of cancer, he went to a conference of Orthodox therapists where he would meet his wife, Gail, who is the Dr. Ruth to the ultra-Orthodox world, and a trailblazer in the therapy work that she does on behalf of that community. And together as a couple, for Linda and me, which is another story how I got to know him, are sources of what Psalm seeks to do, which is to elevate us. He is a man who truly, for me, is identified with the melody, but more with the use of the melody, namely, as I began, great spirituality is anonymity. He, as I have known him, is remarkable for his humility. People don't know it's his song any more than we know who wrote these psalms. That's what makes psalms distinctive. They are ultimately calling on the best parts of ourselves to rise with trust to higher places. And so that's a little bit of a riff. It sounds almost homiletic at the end, but my text is even more than the song, is Rabbi Abe Twersky. So to all, thank you for giving me a chance to study, to share, and to learn.
Rabbi, are we doing Kaddish?
Yes, let's close with Kaddish. If anybody is in mourning or having a yurt site, it's a chance to join together and by answering Amen to honor. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
Man.
V'alma v'ivrak kirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'chon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah v'varach, le'olam omei omayah. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yita'ar v'yitromam v'yitaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'la, shemei d'kudshah v'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran v'yalma v'yimru, amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu V'kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. O say Shalom V'romah Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'kol Yisrael V'kol Yoshvei Tevel V'imru Amen. I look to see you tomorrow. Psalm 29 is a psalm we sing both on Friday night and on Saturday when we processional with the Torahs. In that regard, there will be words and many melodies to Psalm 29. I look to unpack it and learn from it with you tomorrow. Have a good day.
Thank you.